template that the board has established. And a lot of them do. It's just sort of an easier one-stop shop. And so just maybe suggest for you to take a look at that system at ARB and see if there are any creative ways to use something like that. Because Fran, your point's very well taken about a template, but it maybe even can go beyond, a template between coalitions, but maybe even something that could be used statewide. And I hope that the coalitions are already doing this, but I would hope that these lengthy forms, at least where possible, that they're all the same. Whatever's on page 1 is the same, page 2, page 3, and then you get to the end where the differences do need to be reflected, and just have, the extra page where then the consultant would be doing, some work that would be a little different as between regions. I don't know if that's being done already or not.
I'm not prepared to bring something to you today, but what I can do is get a specific example or two of what a tier 3 grower in the Central Coast would have to fill out to be in compliance. Just the challenges of filling out your notice of intent down there has posed a lot of problems. Some of that, granted, because it's new and there's changes, but it has proven to be very, very challenging. I'll get some specifics on that. The cost per that you talked about, the question about maybe a more sensitive area, things like that. One of the concerns that we've seen at Farm Bureau coming up more and more are the cost per acre fees that would be incurred when you've got up in the far northern reaches where it's pasture or grazing land and it's irrigated. It is even more damaging and a bigger chunk out of their profit, if they're going to make a profit even, to be able to put those same per acre fees on there. So that's a bit of a challenge in and of itself. And as far as crop types, don't really see necessarily a change in crop types or patterns as a result of this. That's really driven by the market and or the availability or lack thereof of water, depending on where we are.
I'm sorry, what I meant was, are you seeing a correlation between crop type and the higher fees per acre?
I'd have to look into that a little bit more. And we do see and have, over the last number of years now, seen a huge increase and change in irrigation systems. Whether it's return systems that are being put in, or whether it's drip systems or other technology like micro sprinklers irrigation in vineyards or even in orchards. Some of that's water quality driven, has some other benefits. More often than not, my own personal experience is we're not using less water, but we are being more productive by putting those types of systems in, which then lend to some of what Fran asked about back in January about other benefits due to these things. So.
Great. Terrific. Thank you very much for that progress report.
Waiting for our slides.
While we're waiting, I should let the rest of the board member know that I received an email from Jeff Brousseau this morning. He's the chair of the stormwater group, and he's has a really, really bad cold or flu, and so he was not able to make it today. But he has been working very hard.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Rooney. I'm with Agricultural Council of California. Thank you, Chair Marcus and members of the board for the opportunity to comment today. And my co-chair, Bob, you want to introduce yourself?
I am Robert Gora, Senior Advisor at the Gualco Group. We represent wine growers, several irrigation districts, and SEB. And I apologize in advance for leaving in about 20 minutes. I over-optimistically scheduled an appointment with a department director at his convenience. So anyway, I'm sorry.
I just want to start off my comments by saying I appreciate staff's comments earlier about the opportunity for feedback and engaging on this process. We look forward to that as we get our recommendations pulled together, and so we will engage staff at that level. This is an outlook of the committee work that we've undertaken at this point. We've had 2 stakeholder meetings, November 28th and March 6th. In addition, we've had a number of phone calls and email exchanges with individual stakeholders. 87 participants on the official committee. We are getting some feedback. It's a little bit better than in January, but we're still getting, but it's still slow moving at this pace. We are getting some anecdotal information with regards to cost specifically, which I'll talk about in a few slides here. And then we will be seeking out potential recommendations for short-term and long-term improvements to the program for the June report. Bob and I talked this morning. I think what we'll probably end up doing in the next couple of weeks is sending an actual written survey out to the stakeholder group to try to trigger additional feedback, because of the lengthy list of participants and the diversity of industries, it doesn't make any sense for us to continue to try to track them down this way. It's pretty inefficient.
Although we have managed to offend many of your colleagues, I went to the Board of Agriculture and went around to each of the 14 members and made them promise to send us data. So. And we will be, in response to a request from the Vice Chair, we will be presenting this informally to the board of the California Roundtable on Ag and the Environment to get their feedback. Both Emily and I sit on that board. So.
This slide I actually just stole from my previous meeting. The overarching themes are still consistent, even with the new information that we are getting from our stakeholder group. You know, again, if we simplify the process enough, staff can focus on bad actors and encourage technology and actually improving the environment. New regulations should be, you know, results-oriented versus process-based. Compliance for this permit is immensely complex. The case studies are insanely different every time I talk to somebody. So that's been interesting. I've learned a lot. And again, but under every single scenario, everybody realizes that they do not want to relax environmental standards. We're just trying to improve the process. Some of the examples of excessive costs of compliance, the top 2 are mostly administrative, sampling and reporting, creation of different nutrient plans, that sort of thing. Equipment costs, this was kind of new to me as a new development from the last workshop. And equipment costs meaning investment in actual equipment to improve, you know, compliance, upgrades, rental equipment to actually implement the tasks of the permit, that sort of thing. This is actually a pretty substantial cost. And then creation of the annual report.
For many of our stakeholders, it's not so much about the cost of the permit, it really is about the cost of compliance. There are many things that are hidden. Hiring consultants, one of the things that surprised me was, and this will be in our final report, one of our major stakeholders has a significant expense in software, in compliance reporting software, in getting it developed, hiring a consultant just for that, and then having the standards changed. I visited, this is anecdotal, forgive me, I visited a very large grower who mentioned to me at the end of our session he was leaving for Washington in the morning state to look at property because his customers, the large buyers, were telling him, you need to get your cost per item down. And he said, I can't budget more than 1 year out because my permit costs go up so much. I need to be able to do a 2 or 3 year budget. So it's not only the cost of compliance, but it's the continually escalating cost of compliance on a relatively, for a major operation, a short notice. And then at the very end, the last item, annual report, a lot of our people are saying, well, there's tremendous redundancies in monthly reports, quarterly reports, and data they know they're gathering that aren't even being examined.
At the last meeting, we were asked to come up with some sort of pie chart or something to talk about the split up of costs. And this is not scientific or peer reviewed. I'll just put that out there. this is Rooney reviewed. Anyway, I went
But is
ahead
there
and
disagreement or uncertainty?
that's right. There's a lot of uncertainty,
And is
but I don't
it
think anybody will
scientific or
disagree.
policy?
Right.
Hey, I like pie. Quick,
Right,
hard
right.
nut.
That's right. This is specifically for Mr. Moore's request. And we did get anecdotal information on the types of costs, and these are basically 4 buckets of costs. And the first one is the initial setup costs. What I found is it's a roughly 20 to 30%. For this pie chart, I put 26%. This is to develop the actual permit process, the notice of intent, provide supplemental information, the back and forth in just that initial engagement process. The second piece is administrative, and that's usually about 10 to 12%. This is monitoring reports, developing plans. The thing that concerns me about that number is actually I think it's kind of low. I learned when I went back to some of the stakeholders that they were not actually counting existing staff time, like internal staff. They were looking strictly at their consultants' fees, but a number of them will have 1 to 4 people on staff just strictly doing monitoring for this program. So in some cases, that's not included in this administrative number. So that might be low, but it is an issue. It's a cost. The third piece is the sampling and labs. That's about 32%. Cropping studies, lab costs, that sort of thing. And then again, that last piece is the, equipment costs, the cost for the equipment of actually implementing the compliance procedures under the permit.
Setup is not a one-time burden. It doesn't go away. It can change repeatedly with changing requirements. It can change annually, so it's not something that diminishes. And administrative, again, it's as Danny inferred, it's not a level of expertise that comes with the territory. It's frequently added on. It can be highly technical. It can change from year to year. So and we'll provide these details. And sampling costs, as Steve knows, can change from type of user, type of water requirement, they can be highly variable. So there is no easy template to use for these.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the equipment, is that, it probably is a big span of things, right?
Yeah.
It's not just monitoring equipment per se, but it might be
Right. There's,
know,
for example,
a
one-
loader
Yeah.
or an excavator or something,
Mhm,
or
that's exactly right.
renting equipment to move dirt.
Yeah, exactly right. One of my members rents a sprinkler system that's pretty expensive, and the rental cost is high. It's a seasonal permit use, but they have to rent the sprinkler system all year round in case they need it. Alternatively, there's also investments in capital upgrades, that sort of thing, just to improve the technology. So it's the span is, in terms of diversity of equipment, is huge, but it is a significant cost.
And then there's also O&M in
Right.
addition to capital or rental. Okay.
That's a good point, actually. I don't even think we included O&M costs on that. This is strictly for equipment, so yeah. Potential short-term solutions. These are just some preliminary ideas that some of our stakeholders had. The top one, is there a way to allow a waiver for lower priority applications? The one sort of outstanding example to us is, obviously, the numbers of applications and the type of work that the staff has upon itself is pretty considerable. And so there are just lag times in approval processes for some of these permits. And in some cases, they're over 10 years. And staff is obviously being forced to prioritize internally as to where to put staff's resources. So if there's an outstanding permit that's taking this long, is there another way to either grant a waiver or do some sort of streamlining permit process so that folks can actually operate under a permit? Typically, under these examples, a company could potentially start to operate under the permit, but then 10 years later, staff will come in and say, no, maybe you should have been doing this, but they're reluctant to make huge investments in equipment when they are not sure what the parameters of the permit are going to be 100%. reevaluate what requires a licensed professional. This is a very small item, but it's come up on more than one occasion. For example, an engineer should be used, a civil engineer should be used for design work and that sort of thing, not mathematical equations. So, there are administrative staff that could probably handle basic math, but sometimes it requires a sign off on a licensed professional. So eliminate redundancies in the monitoring program. This goes back to what Bob said earlier about all the different types of reporting. Consider location of discharge. One of the companies that I spoke with, if water is going to be discharged, let's say on a tree orchard, some sort of orchard, this is a significant investment for a farmer. So they're not going to put water that's high in salinity in an orchard because it's going to damage the orchard. So is there a way to look at the location of the discharge on a case-by-case basis and maybe improve the permitting processes around that? Self-monitoring with spot checks. We've talked about this before and back in January as well. Reduce the paperwork burden so it makes logical sense. I think that goes back to the monthly, quarterly, and annual reports again. And then this idea at the bottom, create or consider an environmental electronic reporting tool. The folks at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development have talked about an electronic permitting tool. And I have not spoken to them about this ISO 14001 program, but it's my understanding that this is used internationally. It's used by the UN, and it's based on this idea of continual improvement. So, stakeholders, regulatory officials, folks can come around, agree on common goals, and then utilize this software program to basically achieve those goals.
In talking to a couple of folks from GoBiz, the analogy is the FedEx system or UPS, not to pick a favorite, but how they track the packages. It's tracking the permit process and enabling, with an off-the-shelf system, permittee to the specific staff member communication. I'm a Kaiser member. Some of you know I had extensive hip surgery a year ago. I can email my surgeon back and forth, and we can have conversations. That's a parallel.
ISO 14000 process is something the industry's used for a couple of decades. They moved from ISO 9000 to 14000, and that was a big deal. I can't tell you what all the differences were, but I used to be able to tell you. But it's basically about looking at all your processes to make sure that your inputs, it's about pollution reduction in the most sustainable way within whatever your operation is, and it has the virtue of the electronic reporting system. So it works on two different levels.
Okay. Thanks. Potential long-term solutions. Again, moving from process-based to outcome-oriented solutions. Is there a way to create a water quality improvement plan with mutually agreed upon goals, but allow flexibility to achieve those goals? So long as the ball is moving toward those end goals, I think that this would be immensely helpful. I put it under longer-term solutions because to me that requires quite a bit of a paradigm shift. So it's probably not going to happen overnight. So this is where I parked it for now. Create representative sampling programs. The dairy industry has that. There's been some conversation amongst the stakeholders as whether or not they would prefer an industry versus watershed regional type of approach. But I think, just allowing that type of work would be helpful. Execute sample programs that are strategic in frequency and location. Obviously focus on high-risk areas first. That would probably make logical sense. Evaluate cost share programs potentially that can assist with equipment costs. This was an idea I had when I saw the cost of equipment, and one program comes to mind, and I have not vetted this with any of my ag colleagues, but as an example, there's in the Farm Bill program, there's EQIP, the Environmental Quality Improvement Program, and this is a cost share program to help farmers and ranchers improve, build certain projects on their farm and ranch that could help improve the environment. So this could be a potential idea for this type of work. Again, field trips for staff. We discussed this at the last meeting, and staff seems open to that, but it keeps coming up in our conversation, so I want to keep it on our slide.
Can you move it to short term?
Hey, yes, I will do that.
You have to, is it essential mission-oriented travel?
Right.
And just so, Emily, I like your cost share program idea. I've always been jealous of the Air Board's Carl Moyer program, and the opportunity there for cost share with the locals. So, yeah, let's explore that.
Okay. I mean, obviously, we have some fiscal constraints in the state, but I think we can look for sure.
Several of
That's
our
why it's long term.
Right.
several of our non-ag stakeholders were especially vocal on that last point. They'd like staff to have the capacity to stay current on technology. They felt that when they proposed something new, they were asked to pursue special studies immediately as opposed to staff already knowing. In other words, they felt they were penalized for sticking their hands in the air, saying, we'd like you to consider this, and then immediately their cost burden was doubled or tripled simply for trying to do the right thing.
Outstanding challenges. The diversity of our stakeholder list is immense, and so we are grappling with that. The costs oftentimes do not reflect internal staff time, so I'm not sure how we are going to quantify that, but I think, in terms of priority of costs, we just work through what we have, and that internal staff time hopefully will be devoted elsewhere or will also reduce as a result. Potential legal challenges, CV salts, and the nitrates in groundwaters, those are all sort of wild cards for us.
The potential legal challenges is a wild card for us, too.
Yes, thought I'd put it on there. Next steps, the one bullet that I was absent in putting on here is sending out that survey, so we'll probably do that in the next couple weeks, and then documenting compliance costs again, and then start suggesting strategies for improvement and seek out solutions, and then implementation timeline, and include that in the June report.
One thing the board may consider that you have the opportunity to do is integrate with the SWRCB study, which is much more long-term and policy-oriented. It's something to think about.
And that's all we had. Any questions?
Well, I would just say maybe invite board members when you do the tour, in case
Oh, yeah,
any of us can go.
absolutely.
And can we get a copy of this, maybe just electronically even?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That was very responsive. I especially appreciated the pie.
You bet.
Just, Mr. Moore, we tried very hard to put in a graphic for you, but we could not come up with one.
I'm going to have to decide what my favorite kind of chart is just to make it challenging for you. I'm not sure I like charts that much is the only problem, so I'll have to see.
Can I just board member Marcus,
Yeah, sure.
offer to this work group in particular, since I think because of the lack of homogeneity of the membership of the group, it's difficult to get your arms around specific recommendations and costs associated with specific compliance activities. But to the extent that you can do that, that would be very helpful. Even if it's not a general compliance activity, but specific to individual permits that you think reflect areas where we can make improvements, that would be extremely helpful, because especially as we have a broader conversation beyond the stakeholders and the staff, and we bring in other interests, documenting and providing those specifics will be extremely important.
Karen, we've added several significant cost-specific items. I will warn you, they're coming in very broad ranges.
Great. Ms. Larson.
Madam Chair and members of the board. It's my first time to get to say that, Madam Chair and members of the board, and my first opportunity to appear in front of Board Member D'Adamo, so welcome. It's nice to meet you, sort of. My name is Bobby Larson. I'm the Executive Director of the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. I am one of 4 co-chairs for the NPDES stakeholder group. My other co-chairs are Jackie Kepke from East Bay Mud, Terry Mitchell from Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District, and Debbie Webster from the Central Valley Clean Water Association, who is here but for some reason refused to sit next to me. I'm not taking it personally, but she is here if you have any questions.
She's already
for her.
done her time this morning, so she's ceding the floor to you.
That's right. We are the MPDS stakeholder group. We are primarily made up of POTWs at this point, but we have been communicating and keeping in touch with our industry colleagues. They are on our mailing list and are aware of what we're doing, so we think we have them in the loop. And where we are is we are in what I would call phase 2 of our effort. Phase 1 was the February 4th document that we submitted to you and that is posted on your website, I believe, that summarizes our recommendations, which we were close to having done, but not quite when we appeared before you last time. And there are 10 short-term recommendations in that document and several long-term recommendations. I would be happy to quickly summarize them if you need me to, but otherwise I was relying on you having access to that document, and I know I've had a chance to talk with at least 3 of you about the document in some detail, so I'd be happy to follow up with any specific questions. But where we are is the next step in implementation. We had a conference call last Tuesday, so the 2nd, in which we assigned small work group co-chairs for each of the short-term items fall into sort of 5 major categories. There are 10 of them altogether, but they fall under subheadings. So we have co-chairs for each of those efforts who have been tasked in the next month to do 2 things, and I'll talk about each of these 2 things in a little more detail, but they've been tasked to, number 1, develop a proposed implementation plan. How would you take this idea and turn it into action by the board? And then secondly, to really try to refine and put some specifics on those cost estimates that are very general in the document that you have. So that's what we've asked our work groups to do between now and early May. We're also developing some ideas for the issue that we teed up in the introduction to our document, which is there something we can do to ensure that going forward, we're looking at